All right, hello and welcome to the video lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be solving the await keyword challenge. And so here we're going to be seeing the other half of the async await syntax, which is the await portion. And the basic idea of an async function is that we can create an async function using this async keyword like we did in the last challenge. And when we have an async function, we are then able to use the await keyword within the function body. And the await keyword is basically saying await for some value. So you have to supply some other value to the await keyword, which is going to fulfill in the future. And so we can see that in this current challenge with the await keyword. And so in the editor here, we have two functions. One of them is called make promise, and the other is called fulfill the promise. And the make promise function is something which is going to return a promise. And we don't need to worry too much about what a promise is right now. If you're curious, feel free to read some about it, but we'll cover promises in a little bit more detail in the later part of the async module. But for now, this is just a helper function, which is going to allow us to work with an async function here and understand more about what it's doing. So the key idea is that a promise is something that can be fulfilled in the future. So the promise basically represents a future value which hasn't actually arrived or completed yet. And so when we call the make promise function, like we're doing here, we're getting back a promise. And the promise is going to actually it's going to contain a value, but we're not going to know what that is until sometime in the future. And so right now, if we run this code, which has happened over here, we will see that we have these log statements, and we will see we get the resolution value is, and we have this object here. And so that's coming from this line right here, where we are logging out this resolution value. And so this object that we see here is basically representing the promise, which is returned from this make promise function. And so we're getting back the promise, but what we want to do is we want to actually simply wait for this promise to be fulfilled and return an actual value. Basically, you can think of the promise as a wrapper around a future value. And again, don't worry too much about the details of promises just yet. Just think about this as an example of some code which can return a value in the future. And so our function here needs to be changed so that we can wait for that value to exist. And to do that, we're going to use the async await syntax, of course. So the first thing we want to do is we want to convert this function to an async function using the async keyword. And then we have to use the await keyword to tell the program to wait for this promise to be resolved, or to wait for this future value to arrive. And we can do that by just adding the await keyword right here. So this is going to effectively say, wait for the result of calling make promise. And so of course this returns a promise. And so this is going to wait for that promise to present a value. And then it's going to store that value in this resolution value here. So with these two changes, let's go ahead and run the code again. And we will see that this passes the tests. So if we dismiss this, we'll see that now we have the resolution value is I promised. And if we look up to our make promise function, we'll see that it's either calling these other two functions here, resolve or reject, with these two different strings. And the first one is being called with I promised. And so this is the string which is actually being resolved from the promise which we are awaiting here. And the reason it's this string instead of this other one is because we passed in true for this should resolve argument, which is coming from here, promise should resolve. And so if we change this parameter of true to false, and we run the code again, we will still be passing the tests, But if we look over here, we will see that now the promise rejected. So again, feel free to look into this a little bit more if you're curious about how promises work, but we will cover them in more detail in a few challenges. The point about this lesson is that by adding the async await syntax, we can wait for future values to essentially be resolved or fulfilled. And so in this particular case, we have a promise here. And in general, you're always going to be awaiting promises or promise-like objects. But this could be various different things. For example, this could be a timer, or it could be something that's making a network request, or other types of things. And so to await those future values and then to have programming around that, you simply have to add this async keyword to your function, and then that allows you to use the await keyword within your function, and so then you can await any promise-like values. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this lesson, and we will see you in the next lesson.